What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Mi Importas Tu California podcast. I'm your favorite Chicano in politics, Christopher Sanchez. And joining me today is a new guest to the show, Daniela Rodriguez.
Hello.
And of course, returning is your Latina Advocate, Carol Gonzalez.
¿Cómo están?
Hey, everyone, how y'all doing today?
Pretty good, pretty good.
Yeah, well, Daniela, it's your first time being on the podcast or any of the podcasts that we hosted.
Yeah.
Please tell us a little bit about yourself so folks out there know.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I'm so excited. I'm a big fan of the work. So this is really exciting for me. Yeah, my name is Daniela Rodriguez. I'm proudly from the 818
Hey,
down in San Fernando Valley.
the
So the
Valley
Valley, I know
for all
I
the
know
other
some
valleys.
folks. The Valley means something else, but that is home, my Valley. Born and raised, and very proud daughter also of immigrants, and that really has shaped really where I'm at now up here in Sacramento doing the work that I get to do. um I started as a fellow back a couple years ago. Now I've been in this space now for going into 6 years, which
Dang.
I
Wow,
don't
time
know how that
flies.
OG.
it's just I was just having this thinking about this, like, where did time go, right? So been in the space for going into 6 years. I started as a fellow, started my policy work really focused on higher ed access, college affordability, and now recently have made a pivot, really focused, not really a pivot, but more focused on immigration policy, which is really immigration advocacy rather, and that really is my passion, and so that's what I do and why I'm here.
Dang. And so a fun fact about Daniela and how I met her is she interned at Chirla's office in Los Angeles. I was
Wow.
working for the organization,
Hmm.
and I was like, hey, I need a bunch of college kids that are interning in LA to come up. And she was one of them.
Aw.
What year was that? Like 2000 and
2018 or 2019, one of
yeah,
those two.
it's 2018,
Yeah.
2019.
Uh-huh.
She was one of the students who came up, and then we were part of a bigger lobby day with a bunch of other organizations, and she ended up being on my lobby team. And then
Aw.
it was the first time we met, but it
Hmm.
was really funny because we took like a lot of photos with a bunch of offices. She met a bunch of
Yeah.
people, and then she became a fellow with the following year.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then she
Yeah.
came back. She came back to Sacramento, and I was like, oh, I know
Yeah.
Aw,
her.
cute.
Yeah, that was my first time actually ever in Sacramento, ever in the capital. And it was I was really nervous, but it was one of those like core memories and core moments that really also just changed my trajectory. I think, I always wanted to get involved, didn't know how, and at the
Mhm.
time the opportunity came up. And that the crazy part about that experience was we drove up like from LA like at 4 in the morning, really early. We left that same day. And so it was a long day, but it was doing the work up here with people like Chris, really made it clear that I wanted to do this work.
You hear
So
that, Carol? See, I changed her life is what she said.
Ah,
in
you were the
short,
capital. No, I'm
Yeah,
just kidding. That's
me.
so
She got
cute.
inspired. She was like, "Who's this guy talking
Aw.
in this meeting?"
I'm just following you.
She's like, "I guess I want to be here now."
I feel like the first time you go to the Capitol, I feel like it does change your life. If you've always wanted to make change, I think I don't know. It to some extent does change your life. But I guess knowing Chris too.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's true. Yeah, one of our interns this summer, they were telling me how like symbolic and significant the Capitol was to them,
Mhm.
and I was like, oh, yeah, I don't have that no more. So I gotta hold it back sometimes when I'm with the younger folks.
I was talking to a travel agent very quickly earlier this week, and she was, we were talking about what I do, and I'm like, oh, sometimes I have to go into the Capitol, part of my work. And she goes, you can go in. I'm like, yes, it's the people's house. It's a public space. Like, there
Yeah.
are certain rooms, there's certain people can enter, but you can go in. You don't have to dress fancy. That's the people's house. And she's like,
Mhm.
okay, when I go, I'm gonna tell them that Daniela Rodriguez allowed me to come. Like, oh, you don't gotta say that. You don't gotta say that, but it's open. Yeah.
Aw.
Dang. Well, thank you both for joining me today. I think it's a really pivotal moment in the legislative process. So the legislature just wrapped up introducing a bunch of bills and then pulling from our source, Chris McKelly. Um,
Mm.
there was 1,800 bills introduced this year, and then so
Wow.
there's typically there's always around something over 1,000
Mhm.
bills introduced. Sometimes there's over 2,000 bills introduced.
Yep.
But I think there's a couple things, and just looking purely at the numbers, it's like folks kind of honing in on the priorities.
Mhm.
This year is a big election year. A lot of people are running for different offices, so they got to figure out how much time am I going to spend in the district, how much time am I going to spend in the capital. But in the legislative process, when you have to ask yourself, well, how do they get these over 1,000 ideas to change over all the laws in California? And so all of us as advocates are part of that process.
Mhm.
So tell me, what has been your experience to help introduce legislation, to help tell an author, to a legislator, hey, you should carry this idea. Like, what has that been like for you in the past? Or this year too? Was there anything crazy that happened this year? Any really great stories right out the gate in January? You got an author to say yes to you?
I feel like low key, I work with offices since the year before. Like session ends, like, all right, let's talk about it. Because I hate pitching bills close to a deadline. I am sorry. Like, I know, like, I get paid to do this, but I tell all my clients, like, if you all want me to pitch a bill, you got to let me know early. And I feel like try to set systems in place so they don't have me running around. But I'm not going to lie, I did have to run around this year.
Yeah.
And I feel like it was one of those, like, it's not like a deal breaker if we don't get someone because I think we were still thinking about like trailer bill language or like thinking about other ways to get what we wanted. So to some extent it was more symbolic, but I think most of the bills that I'm working on already had an author, and I think I try to make it my mission to kind of secure that ahead of time so that I don't feel like a chicken with its head cut off,
Yeah.
because I think that's what most advocates feel like. And I think just walking into the building, I see people running like, "Oh, what are you pitching? What are you pitching?"
Mhm.
And to some extent, like you get some cheese man, like, "Oh, like this is what some advocates are working on, or this is what they're doing." And I think you kind of get a sense of like what's urgent to some members, or like what are some members maybe prioritizing over other things, or I think the commonality this year that I feel like in the past I didn't see, and I'd love to hear
Mhm.
what your experience was, Daniela or Chris, but to me, I feel like folks would be like, "Oh, this is a great idea. Let us like get back to you. Like we have to think about like what else we're working on." And I'm
Hmm.
like,
Yeah.
"Bro, just tell me no."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like just say it, like
Yeah.
just tell me no. Like if this is a no for you, like let's save us both the trouble and the time of me coming back to bug you.
Hmm.
Like if this
Mm.
isn't what your boss wants to work on, tell me your boss doesn't want to work on this, respectfully. Like I love it, and I
Mhm.
feel like shout out to my friends and the homies who like help out, and it's like, oh, I'll put it on the list or like at the top or lo que sea. But
Yeah.
to me, I'm like we could just save each other the trouble,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
was my
And I
experience.
think that's what also leads to, and particularly this year, has led to a lot of those like kind of it feeling like last minute because
Yeah.
you're you keep getting these like vague, oh, maybe kind of interested, still
Mhm.
looking. And it's like, that was like a lot of time that, we could have, and obviously you're always, covering your bases and talking to other members, other offices. But that clarity, yes, no, that was tough this year, I feel,
Yeah.
for sure.
So what I'm hearing from both of you, at least in the way I'm translating this, is some of it sounds like it's like dating. You're like, do you like me? Do you not? Do you want to go like you have to go on a second date to like commit? So and that's kind of that's kind of how it is sometimes.
How was
So
your dating experience then?
oh well, so well, I always go on a second date. There's never
Yeah.
I never just don't go on one date and then never see them again. I mean, sometimes they like me. They like me. They're like, "So you want to be my boyfriend after the first date?" That's how I pitch bills too. I was like,
Yeah.
"This is the one you're gonna love, like
Yeah.
for real. Like it's gonna treat you all great."
So you didn't deal with any folks just being like, no.
No, I typically never get another first time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I
Period.
always make it. I always
And
tell
this
the
is why
story.
Chris gets the big bucks. No, I'm just kidding.
I always tell a story. Let me tell you about some senora from your district who
Mm.
this bill is going to
Yeah.
impact. And they're like, I didn't think of it like that. And I was
Yeah.
like, and that's why we're gonna work together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
yeah.
think you just hit on a point of like, especially this year. I think what I like about this type of work is like each year is very different. Obviously, there's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
there are timelines, and even those tend to, change every once in a while. But for the most part, there's a process. But the dynamics, like the political context, that really changes not just what folks want to prioritize, offices want to prioritize, but also how we as advocates have to maybe not reframe, but approach our pitching very
Mhm.
differently. Like one year, you're going to be focused on whatever is happening at the district level. Some years you're going to focus on district and what's happening at the state level,
Mhm.
Yeah.
what's at stake. So I feel like I think that is important. Oh, no matter what, the centerpiece always holds, which is you have to have constituents and the people being the ones that are telling the story, whether it's direct, you bring up somebody, or as you're pitching, that
Mhm.
is a very powerful tool, because we have to make it easy for the member to see, okay, why
Yeah.
I have literally dozens of people coming up to me with an idea. How is your idea different, and how is it honestly impacting my district or not?
Yeah. And maybe how they're gonna feel like they're serving
Yeah.
their constituents or make them look good for their folks so they continue to get reelected too.
Mhm.
And I think that's a great point as well about we have to tell the stories, but we're competing with a lot of other interests. And for the work that we all do, it's
Mhm.
public interest, right? It's
Yes.
Yeah.
on behalf of people who
Yes.
don't have dollars to hire lobbyists themselves, but
Mhm.
fortunately there's
Mhm.
organizations that serve those communities that partner with folks like us.
Mhm.
But when we're pitching, we're also competing with deep pockets on the
That part.
other side, money in politics that are also pitching bills. So it's not like an easy thing. Like, I can tell this story; it's a humane story,
Mhm.
and it needs to be done. There are limits on how many bills a legislator, a state assembly member, or senator can introduce, and so sometimes they tell their staff, well, what are these friends telling us? Have our
Mm.
friends come to us and said this, and they're
Yeah.
trying to balance their legislative package. So it is a competition, and
Yeah.
it really is. We're not necessarily, oftentimes we're not necessarily competing
Yeah.
against each other. We're
Mhm.
really competing against that other interest that's in Sacramento.
Mhm.
And then with the bill limit too, I think those members that are like
Mm.
more of those advocates or the folks that we want to like really work with, I
Mhm.
think they also had like smaller packages this year
Yeah.
because they worked on so many things last year that I think it made us trying to get like I wouldn't say a good author, but like a strong maybe advocate or someone who, really cares about the issues that we're going for. I think it was a little harder too.
Yeah.
I don't
We just
know
on that point,
if
like
that was.
also like we're also pitching this year. We were pitching bills in the second year, the second year of the 2 year session,
Mhm.
Yeah.
which also adds a nuance to the approach, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Part of that is, some of them were like, well, let's wait to see what happens in January. Like, maybe
Mm.
there's a bill, that 2-year bill that I'm working on right now, that it might die, it might not,
Mhm.
and if it dies, then I'm going to reintroduce it.
Mhm.
Because and so I think there was some of that. At least I heard some of that from offices. They're like, oh, like talk to us, let's continue to talk, but we're not going to commit to like late January because we want to see
Mhm.
what's moving through the process.
Uh-huh.
So that was something that I came across on a couple of times I was pitching. But the real question is, do you have any very like favorite stories about you pitching a bill ever, or you trying to introduce a bill? Any stories that come to mind? You're like, this was one of my favorite experiences, or it was like a very big negative experience when pitching bills.
I have one. It's kind of pitching slash introducing
Hmm.
a bill, but a couple years ago I ran into a situation that Carol you described earlier around like the long like yes, no, maybe so. And ultimately it seemed like the staffer was interested, couldn't get it in front of their boss, quickly enough to make a quick decision. But what they could commit to was submitting an unbacked bill. Like, okay, great, that's gonna help a ton as we continue in case your office is unable to do this. They ended up submitting it as a backed bill. And we're
Oh.
like, oh,
Oh,
that is like that's a whole new set of like procedural just like things, to work through. I can't remember. It's been a couple years ago. Ultimately we were able to have a different author introduce the bill, but there's that piece too of as you're pitching, you're not just pitching an idea, you have to time it. You
Mhm.
have to have, all of those elements. And I think it was just a reminder of you can't get lost in the storytelling. You have to, tell the story, be convincing, tell the compelling story, but also make it as easy as you can for that office, a staffer, so that things like that don't happen. Because
Yeah.
and it was luckily it wasn't so last minute, but there was just so much back end now administrative things that had to get through so we could get it to a member who could actually author it. So that was actually my first time ever encountering that, but it was a good reminder of we are working with the process and there are deadlines and there are procedural steps that are forgiving and others that are not forgiving.
I feel like that's so funny because, like, my experience is the opposite.
Mm.
So I think between our experiences as lobbyists, like, we also are managing like our own clients'
Mhm.
like what they do outside of what they ask us to
Mm.
do, right?
Right, right.
And so, for example, I had a client ask a member's office to submit a bill unbacked, but in reality, that would have been such a great office for them to have authored the bill. And then we end up not having an author, like, and then we're running around to find someone. I'm like,
Mm.
wait, like, if that was the office that you had asked, why didn't you just pitch the bill,
Right.
And by the time I realized who that office was, I'm like, hey, like, can your boss introduce, like, this would be they're like, well, your client asked unbacked, like, I would have pitched it to my boss a month ago.
Yeah.
And I think that was like a moment for me where I'm like, oh fuck, like, like, we don't realize what our clients are sometimes doing themselves.
Mhm.
And then it's like we also don't want to be micromanaging or like,
Mm.
like holding everyone's hand. And I think we get paid to like kind of figure that out for them sometimes, or like
Mhm.
deal with some of those like consequential actions, I guess. But yeah, that was a weird moment for me because that never happened to me, right? I think we could have all been like kumbayaing like by the end of it if we would have just pitched the bill from the beginning. So I don't know. That was a new experience for me because I'm like, oh
Mhm.
fuck, like, I don't know.
It was all stressful. You're like, we
Yeah,
could have had an author,
yeah,
and then, but now I gotta go and knock on
yeah,
all these doors.
That sounds like
yeah,
unnecessary stress.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yes,
very avoidable and if people just talked to each other
yeah,
and
yeah,
communication.
it's very
yeah.
key.
See, it's kind of like dating. I'm
Very
just,
thematic on point.
Yeah.
um, yeah, we that's that when getting the language is the text, what the bill's gonna be. That's like the first part of the process, and then I typically, when I'm asking offices for hey, can you submit this to legislative council so it's unbacked, or so I can get it back from you all. They're like, well, what is it? Like, can you tell me about it? I was like, yeah, it's fine. Like, I'll tell you. I'm asking you because you're a friend. Like,
Yeah.
please. And they'll be like, are you gonna pitch it to us? I was like, well, that's why I'm giving it to you. Some offices I'll ask because they're friends and they're good
Yeah.
partners. And I was like, I'm not really gonna pitch this to you, but I just
Yeah.
can you do this favor for me?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
But I think for myself, the most unique story it wasn't me getting pitched, or it wasn't me pitching. It was me as a staffer when I was a staffer. Um, it was the last day of the legislative deadline. Someone came in like in the afternoon, asked if we still had any spots open. Technically, we did, and I was like, "No, we don't." I was like, "But what do you have?" And then a legis director taught me that they're like, just ask. You always ask. You always want to know. You don't know what's on the other side of that door.
That's true.
And then so I was like, nope, everything's full. But what do you got? Let me know. And then so they pitch, and I called the boss right away, and I was like, this is going to be a really good one. This is going to create stricter requirements for district attorneys' offices who have already done bad things in the past related to like withholding evidence and so forth. And I was like, I think you should take it, right? Send her all the information real quick. I was like, we need to know like within the next couple of hours. And then she calls me back. She's like, all right, let's do it. And then we introduced like at the last hour. They because back in the day, before like nowadays, you can just like send an email, send me the language, it's approved, and then now I think you still have to cross the bill physically across the desk. But like back in the day, like lobbyists would run with like physical language and send it to you, unless they faxed it to you or whatever,
Mhm.
or would send it through a PDF. And then so the lobbyists ran from their office to back to our office, gave me the language, and I had to go to Ledge Council to get it back, and then get it,
Yeah.
and then get it back for them, and then what is it? Boss was available, signed it, and then ran downstairs before introduction deadline, and then the bill became law, and it's actually a law
Wow.
that like a lot of people still celebrate with her. So it's pretty crazy.
Wow, that is a
Yeah,
crazy
yeah,
Aw,
story.
yeah,
Wait,
yeah.
were you
what a time.
Yeah, was that the okay, because it was so last minute it sounds. Was it the last bill?
Yeah, yeah.
So we had to re-
It was the last. Oh, not. It wasn't like the last bill of the legislature.
Right, but like it was pretty down like number wise,
Oh,
right?
100%. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I probably introduced that bill like at 4:15,
Mm.
like maybe even 4:30. Like it was very like they were like looking at me like, oh, you're lucky, you made it down. Yeah,
Wow.
and you had to run and everything at the time. It wasn't like you could
Yeah.
send an email. So
It
Damn.
was meant to be, but yeah, don't procrastinate, but also stuff like that does happen.
yeah,
I think it's cute when members like, or I think staff choose like their bill number, or like they try to get their like cute number.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm like, oh,
714.
yeah, or like, I don't know, like, damn, that was a waste of a cool number when someone doesn't use it right. I'm like,
Mhm.
dang, they don't even know what they got,
Mhm.
you
That's
know?
true. That's true. What is it? I think Umber got 714 last year,
Mm-hmm.
and then I was like, oh, okay, I got you. Or he did it a couple years, but he has
Yeah.
people from Orange County in his office,
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
makes sense. But part in addition to like pitching, it's not just pitching;
Mm-hmm.
it's also vetting it. Like
Yeah.
even though we work for these organizations, us as the advocates have to ask, and because
Mm.
we're gonna get asked by staff.
Mhm.
I think my favorite part about that is annoying my colleagues when I'm asking them the questions about vetting the bills. I'll be like, "Well, who's gonna oppose it, and what's the opposition gonna say?" And then you have to come up with what you think the opposition is gonna
Yeah.
say. And then our colleagues being like, "Stop attacking my bill," and I was like, "I have to, so I know how
I'm
I can
helping
defend it."
you. Yeah.
Yeah, like we didn't know where all the
Yeah.
holes are. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
How's that? Has that ever happened with y'all or?
I feel like I just have to look at stuff through like a op lens. Like, what is op gonna do? Or
Yeah.
like that staffer mindset, I guess.
Hmm.
I feel like there's like a list of things that I try to usually think about before, and I think you do that too. But I don't know. I think that's part of the process
Yeah.
before we get into it being a bill, or at least that's what we should be doing
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
before you introduce a bill. And I think not enough people do it, or I think people think like, oh, we'll get to it. And I think we're gonna see a lot of spot language right now
Mhm.
between now and like a few weeks.
Yeah.
And I think that just shows maybe the preparedness. Some people do it intentionally,
Mhm.
purposely, but I think on my end, I like to feel prepared and I like to know what I'm going up against. And I think we're doing a lot of that homework. And I think you could tell the difference between some folks that are maybe have a lot too much homework to handle, that maybe they're not being able to do that for everything. Um, but I think it should be like a prereq. Like, let's not waste people's time
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
you know? Like,
Mhm.
I kind of really appreciate the 35 bill limit to some extent too,
Hmm.
because I think you get more polished bills, or at least people being more intentional, knowing what they're signing up for to some extent.
Yeah.
That's
I
just me.
I agree, and I tend I'm very much a like, not that you can ever, anticipate everything, but to your point, like I want to, if I'm representing obviously like my organization, if I'm pitching something to an office, I'm not trying to like show up unprepared,
Yeah.
right? Because ultimately, if you want to prepare as much as you can, knowing of course there's all things that you can't fully ever prepare for, but there's just I can't I that's one of my biggest fears, just to
Yeah.
like, oh, I have an idea, figure out the details later. That's a very scary thought.
Yeah.
And I think for me, I always go back to like, how can I, again, going, because we know that there's a lot of decisions that have to be made. how do I, my thought is, how can I make this as easy and as clear as possible for that office to understand what my ask is of them? And maybe that's really like a one page like fact sheet, a one page like memo where it's very clearly why is the issue, um what is, the history, some context. That way you're reducing a lot of this back and forth on answering a lot
Mm-hmm.
of these questions. um and then that way, whatever decision has to be made, it's as much of an informed decision as possible for yourself, for myself, and for the office that you're working with. I like to do that as much as I can.
Yeah. A great mentor also told me that we should try to work backwards from a signature,
Mm,
like your mindset upon introduction or before you even introduce it. You have to think about what do you have to do to get that signature?
mhm.
And if you're thinking from that perspective, I think it helps prepare you the whole year because you want to get that signature and you need to know what you have to say every step of the way in order to get it. And I think it applies that pressure of saying like, okay, if this bill gets to the gate to the point I have to be at the gate,
Yeah,
right? Not every bill will, right?
yeah,
And I appreciate those very much.
yeah.
But I think we also have to be mindful, like if we have to be at the gate, what do you have to know and how are you going to be able to fight that? Because then it's only going to get, you have to make sure you can get that to
Yeah.
the signature. And so, yeah, I think it's all about being prepared and like doing your homework. Like upon an introduction, obviously it looks a little different, but you have to play with the long game.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna. I wasn't planning on charging anyone to listen or watch this podcast, but now I am because Carol's giving away secrets. But thanks for that gold nugget. Literally gold nuggets. No, no, no. I think that's great. I think
Yeah.
strategy is really key to introducing legislation. And I often tell a lot of folks. I was like, introduction is the hardest part for certain bills. It's the hardest part, and I say that because there's like for some of the bills that I've worked on, there's no real opposition. There's no business. There's no entity that's not gonna like what you're doing. It's more philosophical,
Yeah.
right? And it's the only thing that's gonna. So you're already telling the story, and if you've convinced one office, you can convince others, right? And so when I've worked on like human service issues related to affordability, financial aid, it's the only thing in your way of introduction is bureaucracy,
Mm.
our people's own personal beliefs. Especially when I worked on social benefit programs, people are like, but like, why do people need more money for food? And I was like, because they need to eat. Or like, but why do those families need extra
Oh.
assistance for their basic needs? And it's like,
Wow.
yeah, not in California, but when I was in doing advocacy in DC, I was one of the questions was, well, people should be able to eat rotisserie chicken if they're on food benefits, like warm pre-made rotisserie chickens, but we don't want them eating chicken wings. And like I kind of was like, I'm not going to talk about a menu of what people should and shouldn't eat. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous. But those are some of the things that we have to try to get over
Yeah.
in pitching bills and stuff. And it's just nonsense. It's like there is no opposition, there is no corporation. It's just people's biases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's in my personal experience. That's been my hardest hurdle in pitching bills.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know about you if you've all had any other experiences like really that you felt were more challenging in the pitching process.
I think there are some offices that are more fearful to opposition than others. And I think when you talk about like the corporate perspective,
Hmm.
I feel like I've had difficulty sometimes when it is one of those stronger fights, or I think people like maybe like, oh, like we'll figure it out. And I appreciate that because I feel like you don't really know what kind of member you're dealing with sometimes, especially since we've just had a newish cycle of members, right?
Hmm.
People are figuring out what they're going to be working on, what not. And so I think we were learning a lot of what some members are willing to take on, what some aren't. And um, I think in pitching, sometimes like some members are like, oh, like I already have all these skills that I'm going to have a fight. Like I can't take more on. And I respect that. And I think there are others are like, let's go, you know?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Like, let's go. And I think it's hard too because it goes back to that point that you made earlier of like having pack money versus not having pack money, or like, being able to throw down on certain things. And I think that's where we really have to come up with like a strong like community presence or people power, you know, the organizing behind the scenes, because it's a difference whether you're socializing it for people's biases or you're going against money, or you know there might be something going on in people's districts that we might have to like counter too.
That's true.
Yeah.
Which is actually a good segue to. So there's about 1,800 bills introduced, and if you look at the legislature has introduced,
Mm-hmm.
there's several kinds of themes that I at least identify. There's a bunch of different issues. You know, education's always one of them. Affordability is always one of them. But we've seen a lot happen around legislation related to immigration detention, private detention, anyone who's worked for ICE. A lot of legislation in that area. And I think we've seen others, other topics too. Would love to know, like, what are you looking at? What are some of the things? Was there anything that stuck out to you from legislation, like as a whole, that the legislature has introduced? Yeah, what did you notice now that the deadline has passed?
I think for me, just what I've noticed a lot was this package of bills to try to what I call like Trump proof.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we saw a lot of that last year, but I think at the time it felt very like reactive, right? Like, oh, we have to do this and we have to do it with an urgency clause because of this is happening and we don't act now, this could happen. So we saw a lot of that last year, and I think now that we've gone a whole calendar year with that, under that environment, we're still seeing that though. I think with the bills that have been introduced, um, and I think this is evident by like the ice out bills,
Mm.
which we're seeing in both chambers. I'm curious if like a lot of them seems like like trying to make their mark of this, but is there an opportunity to like put it all together? So there's definitely a package of like these ice out bills. The other thing that has really stood out to me is there's also a lot more bills around data privacy and protections.
Mm-hmm.
And for obvious reasons, I think for me it's the point I made earlier on like last year being, for me it felt like very like reactive and in response to the immediate situation. And now obviously things are still urgent and upfront and there's a lot that still feels very reactive. But how I'll be curious to see how these bills are not just reactive but also proactive throughout the as bills get amended. How do we ensure that those bills are proactively preparing and strengthening for the future, maybe for next year or maybe in the future. I think there was a conversations around like the rainy day fund to have that
Mm-hmm.
foresight
Mm-hmm.
of, hey, I don't know what's going to happen in 10 years, but this is why we should do it. So I saw that those two themes come up a lot. Um and I'm just going to be really curious to see how amendments will play out, whether they strengthen or they dilute. um but those are two like Trump proof related ones, and obviously I'm tracking those very closely
Mm-hmm.
given the work that I do. So that's been really upfront for me since tracking the bills being introduced.
Yeah, I feel like I haven't been able to go through 1,800 bills yet.
No, you haven't. Not to.
uh,
It's only the second day.
it's
What are
only
you talking about?
the 2 days in. Um, but I think there was like this larger idea of I think adding to what Daniela had shared is also like the labor side, of AI, and like people considering like how it's going to impact their jobs. We know, for example, like the SAG-AFTRA actors, like they're boycotting, and I think that touches on like the impacts of AI and like the future workforce, teachers,
Mm-hmm.
also being on strikes and seeing how, will there be legislation, to combat some of those concerns? Obviously, like it's AI versus, like, pay. But I think it comes down to how are we mitigating some of these things through legislation. And then, for example, there was like a slurry of insurance bills talking about how do we impact, what's happening across the state, right? Whether it's, folks that are dealing with personal insurances or like homeowners insurance. On a personal note, like we're thinking about, what does like purchasing a house look like? And I think insurance was one of those things that were like, I don't know if this is even like if we should even think about it, because insurance is so expensive right now, right? And I
Yeah.
think we see that in a reflection of the legislation that's being introduced, because I think everyone's seeing the problem, but it's how do we solve for it? And I think it goes back to the ICE issue too. Like we see a problem, but how are we solving for it? We see the federal administration coming down with all these restrictions, and I think we see how it's impacting our budget, but how is it going to impact the legislation that we signed? And I think you've worked on immigration legislation for a long time too, and I think when we do look at the legislation that comes through, we want to make sure it doesn't, like backtrack some of those efforts that other people have made and like the strides that took a long time to get to. And so I'm curious to see like what your perspective was on what was introduced.
Actually, funny enough, the well, real quick on the you were saying like I couldn't go through the all 1800 bills or
Yeah.
whatever. It's and fun fact is that, and this always happens, is that the majority of bills, I think over 1,000 bills were introduced in the last 2 days,
Yeah.
before the deadline. So everyone, like for the viewers and listeners who aren't familiar with the process, they're like, what do you mean you haven't gone through it? Because everyone waits to the last minute.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's strategy though too. They're like, I
Yeah.
want
Definitely.
I want my opposition to be caught off guard. So when I'm looking at the legislation that was introduced this year, a lot of it, um, this is the biggest momentum I think that we've ever gotten. For how many years have we said abolish ICE? How many years have we said ICE? Doesn't need to be an entity. A lot of people forget ICE was created after 9/11. Yes, there was INS before that, but the system that is ICE now is completely outrageous. Um, and some politicians uh, aren't there at the abolishment phase, but to even consider folks not to have employment because they work for that entity or any entity that is associated with ICE is, that was dreams we had years ago and what we had been saying before. A lot of things have happened related to cruel, inhumane things that ICE is doing that's more shown and present. We were saying that under Biden, we were saying that under Trump the first time, and we were saying that under Obama. And um, a lot of people had passed in detention center. And there's ways that those numbers weren't shown, and there's ways where people's stories weren't told. But we're glad we're at this point. We're very appreciative. Fortunately, and I haven't read all the bills, but a lot of it is building, and we're very thankful for folks to come out and to actually author hard legislation, conversations that are going to be very difficult for some people, because it's going to impact. I'll say this. Um, I was walking the halls like a week or two ago, and I heard Spotify in the building, and I was like, I wonder if you're here because of that ICE bill that is gonna impact your pocketbook. I hope you're here for that reason, because I'm gonna gladly work on it against you for sure, and any other corporation that's gonna work against that bill. I'm down. You ready to go? Heads up. We're gonna bring everybody and anyone we need to pass that piece of legislation. So our legislations
Yeah.
out there. So I think there's several bills, but yeah, it's it's something that we've been saying, and our calls are finally being heard.
Yeah.
So, um, dang, I don't know how to move on from
Yeah, it's
Well,
heavy.
I
It's a
think for
lot.
me, I think what's coming up for me is just this what I always tell myself when, I think part of our job is to dream big. And,
Yeah.
if there was a perfect budget, if there was a perfect political like environment, what what would we pursue? And that's always my starting premise. Obviously, like that is why we have a process, is to
Mm-hmm.
refine and get it to that, to the gates or whatever. But this is what's coming up, is we all have to start somewhere, and to not attempt to pursue these, that's only disarming this, hurting our community. So I also, to that point of, it's been a long time coming, and really looking forward to, seeing how a lot of these materialize for the benefit of our community, who is demanding answers, who is demanding action. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was one thing I was thinking about when I was coming today, is that the theme, there's a lot of bills related to immigration, specifically ICE. And so this is to say, all those walkouts, all that
Mm-hmm.
happened in January, all
Mm-hmm.
the demonstrations that happened last year, like, this is the legislation was introduced this year is a result because you walked out. It's a result
100%.
because
Yeah.
you took action, whether you were organized or unorganized, whether you knew what you were doing or didn't know you were doing. You just knew that you needed to be there because something needed to change. And now we're seeing some of those fruits of the labor come to fruition.
Yeah.
And so, for anyone who says, "Well, I'm just one person. It's
Yeah.
not gonna happen. You're gonna change anything." You know how many pieces of legislation and how far they're gonna go, how bold that they were introduced the first time. The
Yeah.
Rainbow Coalition that is coming behind the package of anti-Trump, anti-DHS, like, is heard you loud and clear, and they're responding, right? So
Yeah.
it's we shouldn't be, and we weren't, we're not saying, we were thankful for the politicians, the legislators to introduce it, but it's because of actions that all our communities did.
Yeah. Wait, if I could tie community and like
How, yeah.
rainbows and ice, I don't know how that sounds crazy, but this weekend I went to a roller derby game.
Oh, yeah.
I've never seen roller derby before. For people who know me, I love rugby and I played rugby, but I've never seen roller derby. And so it was pretty cool to go, and I saw it here in SAC, and it was so it was like I was just mesmerized by the fact that there were little kids who were playing roller derby to begin with, but they had ice out on their like helmets, on like they wrote it on their legs, like they made a statement and they made it clear like this is something that they were standing for, right? And I say rainbows because there was a lot of LGBTQ folks there, and you can sense like a sense of community and just like inclusion, and
Hmm.
you can tell that these parents and just people were just like, yeah, we're supporting this. And also I was intrigued because Juarez came to play from Mexico,
Uh-huh.
and they played the Sacramento team, and it was just cool to see adults also kind of taking a stand. And I don't know, I was surprised by it because I've never really seen something like that. And so community has an impact in ways that we might not expect to see it, but it's being translated also into the legislation we see now. And I hope it continues, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Not just in this
Yeah,
moment.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was just
Uh,
gonna say I don't know how we transition from
no,
that either.
We're
no,
still
no.
back at square one.
Dang.
Yeah.
But it's something that we talk about frequently
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
It's been very visible. It's for us. So I think kind of going back to legislation, um, and then so while that's like a very focal point of what's happening, you know, uh, there is the AI with, and then workers protections. I think we're also gonna see, what are some of the impacts happening to the environment,
Yeah.
that is being continued to be deregulated from the federal government. I think there was some legislation around that. Um, but it's kind of a clear message of values too, right?
Yeah.
The budget's
Yes. Health.
a statement of values, and then uh, uh, um, the legislation is a statement of values. Yeah, health is a big issue.
Yeah.
I think there's
A
gonna
lot of
be,
medical related bills that I saw, behavioral health too.
and so going on the medical piece, I think some of the medical legislation is like, so not only are legislators you know, Trump proofing legislation, but they're also gonna be beefing with the governor on
Yeah.
Medi-Cal specifically,
Yeah.
right? And as they should. And so that's part of it. They work with him on certain issues, and they're gonna work with him on those. But he has a very distinct point, and he included that in his budget. and they respond, right? And
Yeah.
and I'm assuming that's the reason why he has to respond with his budget by the 10th, and that's why they have legislation introduced till the 20th, so they can figure out, all right, well, he didn't do what we wanted him to do, so here's some legislation on Medi-Cal. And so
Yeah.
I think we'll see some champions out of Marilena Durazo. I think he's
Mhm.
carrying a couple of those bills, who's really going to be pushing hard on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So was there anything else that you all seen that was surprising or that really stuck out to you in any legislation, or anything that you heard of that's going to be a hot ticket item that you think the legislature is going to be discussing pretty heavily this year? No?
I feel like we talked about it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
okay.
think that was a really good. We covered all
Yeah.
the hot topics that are gonna come up. And but I do appreciate that last point you made around it's like, yes, the Trump proof, but also like, okay, what's happening with how are these bills also responding to, the proposed budget? Um and making sure that there are uh the proactiveness that I talked about, right? Proactively um pushing legislation that's going to protect um, our communities. So there is that element for sure as well. The healthcare one's going to be a big one. So yeah, I think that might have covered it all.
Yeah. And then the last thing I'll say about kind of bill introductions is that I think there's a couple themes, not necessarily about the issues. Um, excuse me. Excuse me to everyone listening. But when it comes to authors, right? Some authors are terming out. And so when we were pitching, it was also, well, they're thinking about their legacy. And so they're like very, like, being intentful on the legislation. I mean, everyone is, but you're like, well, this is my last bill package that I'm going to have, right? Other authors, other members are running for office. They're running for congressional seat. Are they running for insurance commissioner? Are they running for state superintendent? And so clearly you see a lot of them introducing legislation like that. So it's always unique to see how people come up with their variety of bills in the process as well. And so you know, because it gives you a reason to campaign, right? And so you know, one thing that we also see is a lot of people co-authoring, right? Because they want to be able to be
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, I want to be able to talk about that in my district. Here, let me co-author the bill,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then but a piece on this is, so of all the legislators who um, introduce bills, sometimes for example, Speaker Rivas, the leadership doesn't introduce bills. Speaker Rivas has introduced bills this year. He co-authored, I think, a couple. I know he's co-authoring one of the anti-ICE bills. And but on the other hand, we also have Senator Pro Tem Monique Limon, and she actually introduced a bill or two, or a couple bills, and she's co-authored several. So very different
Mm-hmm.
than the last Pro Tem. What are your thoughts about like leadership authoring bills? What do you think that sends? What kind of messages that does that send? And it's been done before, but not in most recent time.
I feel like it's strategic. You know, like their staff works on a lot of things, and it's a matter of like kind of what gets to that level of prioritization for
Mm.
them, you know? But I respect it. I feel like in an ideal world, like take on all the big fights, let's
Yeah,
go, you know?
yeah,
But like I also am mindful that it's a lot. You're dealing with a lot.
Yeah.
And so I think it's pretty cool that she's doing that.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I agree. I think it's another example of, how she wants to approach her leadership. And, just looking at the two bills that, she um, has introduced. I think both of them are, you know, one of them is on environment. The other one is around, I think, adult care facilities. Those are two things that she's very passionate about since she was in the assembly. So I think that commitment that these are, yes, she's the pro temp, but these are also still core issues that she's gonna, go to bat for. So I think it's another example of another element to the kind of leader that she wants to be and how she wants to lead during this time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's exactly what Carol said. Yeah.
yeah. I think, and then you know, there's this term that's used sometimes, is that it's been speakerized or pro temized,
Mm.
right? When a bill the pro tem or the speaker has created high importance for this bill, and so when they do it on themselves and they introduce the bill, it's like, well, this is a for sure pass bill, most likely, and
Mm.
very unlikely that the members who voted for these leaders are going to vote against them. But it really shows that like this is a like kind of a unified message too, and so,
Mhm.
but we're all working on some things. I know you all pitched some things. I pitched some things as well. What are some of the things that you're gonna be working on? Anything that's really, really like this is gonna be one of the items that everyone's gonna watch, or this is something that's really close and personal to you? What are some things y'all gonna be working on this year?
I think for something I'm working on is kind of on this, theme around like not not waiting for the better tomorrow, right? So looking at opportunities of, employment for immigrants, what does that look like? Making sure that they can, not just, live paycheck to paycheck, but also have opportunities that um are that align with, their career interests, their educational goals. So working on some higher education, um, and career alignment, for immigrant students. That's a big theme for the work that I'm going to be working on this year. Um, and some of the other budget stuff. But yeah, career alignment, career readiness for immigrant students this year.
What about you, Carol?
So tough.
They're all personal.
They're yeah, usually they are. Um, I guess, it's the traditional sense of, student basic needs and supporting, pathways for students. I guess in related to like the civic engagement space that I try to bring up a bill or two is paying board members for their service.
Hmm.
Last year, Solacho passed one on the K-12 side, and I think it's opening the doors to ensure that we have representation in spaces where, people might not traditionally be able to access due to their financial like limits. Parents might be working multiple jobs just to feed their kids. We're not going to expect them to want to serve on a board if they already don't have financial capacity. And I think we look
Mhm.
at board representation in a general sense, right? Cities, counties, all the whole shebang. Usually it's folks who have the financial means to do it.
Yeah.
And boards, they haven't really increased how they pay folks who serve on these boards. And so um, we're hoping to help support some of those efforts this year for community college board members, since last year is on the K-12 side. And hopefully there's this trending growth so that we get folks who can serve in these boards and have that representation. Yeah. Um, on another one, I think when we were talking about like federal impacts,
Yeah.
this is a 2-year effort. AB 801, which would ensure that we continue to have investments here in California. I think at the federal level, we think about like what would happen if things go away, and I think what would happen if the Community Reinvestment Act at the federal level went away, right? What does that mean for California? And so this year, we're hoping to ensure that we can expand um, the impact that financial institutions have in our communities, right? The CRA is a way to protect and ensure that banks continue to invest in our communities. And our hope is to ensure that other folks who hold money and have financial impacts can continue to do that here too. I know it sounds like a lot of hoopla, but
No.
really, it's like people with money should invest and support our community, right? And I think a lot of the times people say like, "Oh, we're doing a good job," or "We're already doing this," but it's like if you're doing that, let's just make sure there's statute so you continue to do that. And I think as the state kind of deals with the financial impacts of future deficits, or you think about like you know uh increasing taxes or like doing all these other things, this is one of those ways that we could do without having to do that.
Hmm.
And you're ensuring that our community has the support that they need, because there are a lot of communities that aren't being invested in to the extent that they should be. And so that's one of the more bigger bills, I guess, that I'm working on, because there's such a large coalition of folks who are hoping to see that happen. And, we hope that things at the federal level don't get worse, because if they do, then we're going to really see that impact our state financially, and the communities that they serve too. Yeah.
Hey, well, we know that's a really big bill, and we're really happy that you're working on it so it can impact so many communities.
Yeah.
The bill that I'm really excited to work on is AB 2635 by Assemblymember Celeste
Let's
Rodriguez.
go.
Yeah, I'm really, really excited. This is gonna help landscapers. We're talking about not commercial landscapers, but small landscapers who are in your neighborhoods, who've been impacted significantly by immigration enforcement this year. But it's to ensure this bill would help them have a more just transition to electrical equipment. There was legislation already passed to say that they should have electrical equipment, and we're just trying to say, hey, let's give them some breathing room, some time for them to have a little bit more time to catch up. And this provides some resources and some education to them, so they can catch up and make that just transition because they want to, right? They want to be in compliance with the law. And so we're working alongside some landscapers in different parts of California, with a pretty good coalition as well, representing Inclusive Action for the City on that one as well, who's also one of the sponsors for AB 801. But that's what I'm looking forward to this year. Just another group of workers that I'm able to help out, and that's kind of because it's also personal. My stepdad's dad, someone who was like a grandfather to me, was a landscaper. He had his own little truck. He had a couple of homes that he would do landscaping on, and that's who I'm thinking about when I'm going to be working on this piece of legislation. But to close out our podcast, we have a final thought. We'll start with Daniela and go to Carol, and then I'll close out. Daniela,
Yeah.
share your final thought for the podcast.
Yeah, well, just thank you for having me. I think this is, we've just finished a very important, we got past a very pivotal, critical deadline for the work that we're doing. So getting to kind of talk about that with you all, definitely makes me feel better about going into to work on Monday. And I think my final thought here is, for all the reasons that we just talked about, it's going to be another long year. Um, but what brings me a lot of comfort is knowing that everything we talked about is like so community focused. Like there is that personal connection, and we're seeing the end goal. Like what is our purpose? What is our mission? And staying laser focused on that is gonna make it easier. And the partnership that you mentioned, the word coalition, and the last 2 months have been, as we're pitching ideas, working on budget stuff, doing it in community, doing it with really good partners, leaning on each other when times get tough, um, has made it, easier to get back up when, it's like, oh, I haven't heard from this author. I need an answer. Lean on each other is going to be very, very key for the remainder of the session. So I get to be with two powerhouses today. So thank you.
Dang.
Stop. I still remember the kickball days. No, I'm
Yes.
kidding. Damn, that's hard to kind of go up after, but I guess I'm curious to hear maybe like what listeners have to share on like maybe what's missing from the sludge package this year.
Yeah.
Is there something that maybe us as advocates maybe like we haven't seen much of? Is there something that we should keep in mind as we navigate this year? I think folks, for their own reasons, like we mentioned, for political reasons, their own ambitions, their districts, or, the folks that we work with, like who's missing from the table? How can we continue to ensure that communities feel represented in Sacramento? And thinking about maybe how individuals could be more involved. I think we always say, like find a way to get involved, but I think it needs to be more than just call your member, like vote,
Mm-hmm.
all of which are really important. But I think people really need to figure out how to engage. Like, are the members that represent you, are they being reflective of your district or your community? Like, are they considering some of the priorities that you have you talked to these folks about what those are, right? And I think we just have to continue to encourage people to get more involved. because whether it's a statement of like whether you're saying like ICE out of our communities and spaces that you go to, or having those conversations with your members, having those conversations with your family, your neighbors, like if you're out on a walk at the park, like how are you ensuring that like people are more politically involved in a time where I think all the chaos that is happening, I think it's making it harder for people want to be
Yeah.
involved, right? With the media, everything's like, oh, that's AI or that's fake or what you're reading isn't real or whatever, right? They're like, we're dealing with a larger like bubble.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it makes it harder for people to get involved. And I think we need to remind people like the people power is what really is driving change. And without it, we can't. And so, yeah, just encouraging people to continue to find a way to be connected. Yeah.
No, that's absolutely beautiful. And kind of building off of what you're saying, I think one thing I haven't done lately on my final thought is giving out a shout out. I want to give a shout out to everybody and anyone who has ever walked out to or been visible, to say that they're against what's happening, that they're supporting
Yeah.
immigrant communities. Because let's be honest, a lot of folks went out, had no idea what was the next step, what was going to be the next thing. And we're not saying this is it. We're just saying this is that all this legislation, this is a piece of it, right?
Yeah.
But what matters is showing up, and you showed up. Some of you put your bodies on the line, literally. Some of you have been very unique in how you show up for immigrant communities. I think I heard something that in Los Angeles there's a running club that helps a network of rapid responders early in the morning because they hit the streets at 5 in the morning to go get their run on, and then they monitor as people are being dispatched and so forth. So showing up is what matters, and everyone who showed up, you're the reason why things are changing and why legislation has been introduced. It's not the only thing that's going to happen. We're not settling for that, but it's just one of many things that are to come if you continue to show up. So shout out to y'all. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for being on this podcast, y'all. We're really proud to be with two other powerhouses too.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, no,
Yes,
of
thank
course.
you.
Gracias, gracias.
Huh. This is Christopher Sanchez, your favorite Chicano on politics. You're now tuning into
And you're listening to
Importas, California.